Hey, this is Diana the Midnight Rose. I've literally just rolled out of bed because there's something I really want to talk about in relation to astrology that has been ongoing. And I recently had a reading with one of my TAs, Amy Green. I've also consider Rory, another TA, one of my personal astrologers. It's like the shrink who has shrinks. And Rory specializes in the lots, like your lot of fortune, your lot of Damon, so forth. But Amy is working with eclipses and the nodes. So nodes are something that astrologers tend to struggle to understand. I am not the exception. But with my chart, I have a chart of extremes, extremely good and extremely challenging. Nothing is good or bad, they say in our charts. It's different challenges. So I want to talk about nodes today and also about difficult charts. So if you are someone who reads charts, or you've had a reading and know the full extent of the chart, it's not just, I know my sun sign is Aries. Well, it is, but there's so much more to astrology than that. And I remember when I was in my 20s with my roommate, we went to an astrologer and got a reading done for each of us. And when she was doing hers, it's like, oh, this, you're going to be married, you need children, all the stuff that many people wish for. And then when she got to my chart, she actually literally went, it's like, that explains a lot. It is a challenging chart. And for years, I really carried this burden of looking at all the negative things in my chart, the difficult things. But I remember there was another TA named Rose who said to me in private conversation, some of the most interesting people that she's known or that she knows of have really mixed charts. And that was something I really needed to hear. And likewise, I can think of one person with a really good chart. They have like 4 or 5 planets in domicile in their home. It's like, woo, this person is going to be the president of or the leader of the free world. They've got such great astrology. And you know who that person is? Jeffrey Dahmer. So, having perfectly placed, dignified planets is not always a good thing. Certainly wasn't in Jeffrey Dahmer's chart. So let's talk about the nodes again. Nodes, the north and the south node, are particularly one of the points I would consider challenging. On my south node, which we also call Ketu, Ketu, I have my fallen moon in Scorpio, on the exact same degree, just seconds apart. And then I also have Neptune 4 degrees away in Scorpio. But that fallen moon right on K2, ooh. Then, because nodes are exactly opposite of each other, always, I have my Rahu, Rahu, my north node, on the demon star Algol, Medusa's head, considered one of the worst stars, if not the worst star out there. Atrocities, um, tragedy, horrible events. And that's a fixed star at the 25th degree of Taurus. Once again, literally seconds apart. They're on the same degree. And by the way, nodes are not planets, they're points on a chart. But I have planets right on both of those. And not, I mean, the moon is not considered a bad planet, but it's in its fall. It's challenged. It's having difficulty. So, Amy, with specializing in eclipses and nodes, and she is doing some experimental work with those. She's working on something. It was a what she would call a beta reading that she's only doing through June. And so the south node is the things that are draining, that you're getting rid of, that you're clearing out of your life, letting go of the material, things you're letting go of. Rahu, the north node, is what you're hungry for, what you're reaching for, what you want, what you really want. It's like you're always hungry for it and you're never satisfied. And I mentioned this in another video I did just recently, how this is a perfect example. North Node, of certain unofficial, unelected co-leader has on their North Node Mars. Certain person who likes to wear Occupy Mars t-shirts. And on in the eighth house of other people's resources. So yeah, this is anyway. So there's a perfect illustration of the North Node, what you're reaching for. So it's like, I've got North Node on Algol, the demon star, which one of the future projects of books I'm going to do is about the demonization of women, especially women that were victims. Medusa was once a beautiful maiden who was raped by Poseidon. So she was punished for that and turned into the Gorgon. So this is another one of many. We've got Lilith, we've got Medusa, and this whole demonization of women. I'm going to go off on a feminist diatribe because, yeah, that's a project that's coming. But one of the important things that we talked about with Algol in my classes with Austin Coppock is that Algol is also bearing witness to these atrocities. And if you think about that painting of Perseus after he cuts off Medusa's head and he's holding it out like, here, look, it's a very bold thing. It's like, well, not turning away from the darker side of life, from the bad things that can happen in this world. And I realized a couple of things. First, I've always been a person that wanted to see the fringe, the people that are on the fringe of society, the things that are in the fringe of society, the disenfranchised, the people that have been, who have not had, who need and have not had justice. And as someone, I originally went to school for journalism to be a writer. And when I took the basic photo class, something happened. And especially at the same time, there were protests against apartheid on the college campuses. And when I went to my first protest, something in me just was like, this is it. And photography became such an important part of my life. And until the stroke in 2020, it took me 2 years before I could even hold a camera again, because I had to always hold on to something for balance. So it stripped me of the thing that had been what defined me. But that whole bearing witness, and I had always been fascinated with people who did documentary photography of kind of that underbelly of the world. Out of my three favorite photographers, one is Robert Frank, who did a documentary called The Americans, and it was not as loud or as in your face as the other two I'm going to mention, but it was a documentary of America, which I have always wanted to redo an updated version. I remember once in a photography class, I had a picture and the instructor during critique was like, that is so Robert Frank, it hurts. Best compliment of my life. But anyway, the other two are One is Nan Golden, who did the Ballad of Sexual Dependency, and it was looking at her life during New York during the devastation of when AIDS first came out, and there were a lot of drag queens and first and fringe people that she documented that had subsequently died, and it's devastating. It's really graphic and raw. And the third is war photographer named James Knockway, and he is not your typical war photographer. He takes atrocities and horrible things, and he photographs in a way like perfectly composed and just, I hate to say this, but in a beautiful way, if you can imagine that. And even they even did a documentary on him because he's called War Photographer. And on his website, on the splash page, and in this documentary, he said, "I'm here to bear witness." Algol. So I don't have his birth time. I have the date, but I'm like, there's some Algol there. Bearing witness. That's not the destructive side, but even people that were in concentration camps, the ones that survived, a lot of them had to find a reason to survive, and many said, I wanted to survive to bear witness. That's Algol. That's that head looking right at the things that are ugly in life. And then on the other side, and I wrote a whole thing about fallen planets. We think, oh God, it's in fall. And if planets in fall, air, and detriment are difficult, they're challenging. But planets that are in fall, if you got any in fall, and this is why it's important to get your whole chart read, because everything makes a difference in the nuance of a planet, from being in fall or being in its exaltation. I have the Sun exalted and Venus exalted and Mars in its domicile. Sun exalted and Venus exalted, extreme, and Mars in its domicile, extreme good. Although Mars can be, it is a malefic, it can be a little difficult. Other than that, what else could I ask for except for Jupiter exalted or domicile? Extreme good. And my Venus, my exalted Venus, is ruling the house, the fifth house, and the 10th house. Fifth house of creativity and children, but making the children, not taking care of them. It's about things we enjoy and creativity, which creativity, those are your children, whatever you create, in a sense. 10th is reputation and career. Hello, the extremely good. But on the other side, the for my astrologer from the early reading, every other planet is in fallen or detriment except Saturn, which is my ruler with Capricorn rising. So I used to say my chart was really easy. You just put in the data, print it out, and write across it. You're fucked. But that's not true. And taking this astrology class has really shown me that. But fallen planets, it's like you're in a hole and you can only see that little bit of sky above you. And it's like the gods looking down and saying, you're in a hole there. Well, what are you going to do to get out of that? We're not going to help you. What are you going to do? What skills are you going to develop to get out of that hole? And so by getting out of that hole, finding a way to get out of that hole, you develop a special skill that no one else has. So, having a moon in Scorpio, I was also a hospice nurse, Scorpio, death. And And with Neptune there, intuition, empathy, I always say my greatest skill and my greatest pain or negativity on me in nursing. I worked in an AIDS unit in 1994, and it was a whole different ballgame then. But once again, it was the people that society rejected. I wanted to see that dark side and do something. But my greatest strength in nursing is my empathy, to be able to put myself in other people's shoes, emotions, feeling, the moon, Neptune together, and also the thing that caused the greatest pain and trauma is that empathy. So it's a double edged sword. It truly is. So, in that example, climbing out of that hole was learning to tune in to people in any, and not just in hospice, but that intensity and that fierce drive to defend the disenfranchised. It came from that. So when you're looking at your notes, you're looking at your south node, things that you move away from the material. And also, when I had the stroke and literally lost almost everything I owned, everything that mattered to me, my ability to do the things I love, my siblings abandoned me. Crawling out of that hole has defined me. And with the writing, the putting it to paper, all those things, they have defined me. And then on the other side, your north node, what you're hungry for, you can't get enough of it, what you're reaching for, bearing witness, documentary photography. And this whole session really lit a fire under me. And I'm getting back to going through 30 years of images. I had mentioned that I wanted to redo that, The Americans by Robert Frank, a modernized edition. And with me moving overseas in the fall, I thought, well, this will never happen. But you know what? Again, and I do need to get out the current things that are going on, all the protests and everything. But I have 30 years of images. I used to work as a travel nurse, traveling across the country. And yes, I did a lot of bands and models and things that aren't appropriate for a documentary project, but I also did other things. And I'm only beginning to tap into seeing, oh my God, I've got an overwhelming amount of work and wanting to get back to my photography. There's a German photographer who lives in Albania that is amazing, and she does portfolio reviews and workshops. So I'm looking forward to getting back to that. And because she lives in Albania, it's relatively cheap. So, but when you're looking at your nodes, what is it you need to drain, to get rid of in your life, particularly materially for the South Node? And I can say with the moon there, especially fallen, there were a lot of emotions and things I had to drain and get rid of related to the tragedies I've seen and that I've experienced in my life with the stroke and everything, with working in the AIDS unit. Sometimes you just have to let shit go and getting rid of the material. I had to do it with the stroke, and once again, I'm doing it with moving overseas. What's important, what isn't. It's almost like a monk. Somebody said it's like a monk who gives up all the material things, the things you need to get rid of, and the things you're going to move toward, the North Node. The photography, the documentary photography. That's something I'm looking forward to doing again. And with so much unrest in the world and difficulties in the world, I mean, all I have to do is look to Serbia. There's all kinds of protests going there. It's close to Albania. I've also thought about, as a title for documentary photography, Rocket in the Free World. There's so many things going on right now that can be documented. But so looking at your north node and your south node, what you're reaching for in the north, what you're letting go in the south. And this is one of the many reasons it's important to get your whole chart done. There are so many things. Even the synodic cycles of the planets, like Mars. Mars is such a perfect example because you think, it's a malefic, the god of war, destruction, you know. Well, when it's rising before the sun in its oriental phase, it's a noble defender, a righteous defender, moral defender of truth, or it's got a noble cause. When it gets to the retrograde, opposite the sun, it goes into its berserker phase where it's just violence and destruction. We just experienced that in Mars. We just came out of the Mars retrograde recently, and Mars retrograde in its fall in Cancer. This shows what we're going through globally right now. And then when you get to the Occidental side, rising after the sun, these are your tests and your challenges. The dark night of the soul, the berserker, retro, and the Occidental are challenging you to overcome, and it's pushing you to a higher spiritual truth, but you're being tested. And then you come down to where Mars joins with the sun again, Cazimi, and dies and is reborn, and the cycle starts all over. So just within that cycle, and this is true for all the planets, by the way, they each have different meanings in different phases. Look, I mean, look at all that nuance in just one planet, depending on where it is in your chart, what cycle, what part of the cycle it's in. Which, for the record, mine is Occidental, but 4 degrees from the sun. It's about to go Cazimi and be reborn. So, and Clive Barker also has an Occidental sun. I was like, yes, my favorite author ever. I write horror fiction on the side. I used to do it a lot in my 20s, and I'm kind of coming back to that. It's a way to let out that Mars and Saturn energy. But so in conclusion, there is just so much nuance in your chart. And when you see things that you think are bad, they are challenges to you to rise to the occasion. And that is kind of what I'm writing about with Mars, is how we think of it as such this terrible malefic, but there is a reason for it and for Mars, excuse me, hiccups. Mars and Saturn, they are there to teach you lessons, to bring you to your full potential. They aren't comfortable, they aren't easy, but they're there, and they give you these challenges for a reason, to rise to them. So I just had to get that off my chest. I was laying in bed trying to wake up thinking about that. So I really do want to get more into the astrology and talking about not just what's coming up, but talking about things about reading your chart and things. And I am by no means an expert. I'm still learning. I'm getting ready to go into Austin's second year. And I think I'm going to take classes with Chris Brennan too, just to get a different perspective. If I can just stay awake during his classes. God love him. He is so knowledgeable, and his book is amazing. But he's a little dry, especially compared to Austin. When you have those two together on his podcast, the astrology podcast, Chris is editing out all the spicy comments by Austin in between. And yeah. So they're very different approaches. So that is my rant for the day. I will try to do a tarot reading, or, oh yeah, it's Friday. It's the love reading day. That I'll be doing later. All right. So until the next video, this is Diana, the Midnight Rose, signing off. Let me know in the comments if any of this resonates, if this makes sense to you. That's more important than well, and liking is good, and subscribing. It's good for the algorithm. But I really want to know how this resonates with people. So I will see you in the next video. Thank you.